and we are also finding fipronil in urban creeks throughout the state at levels that exceed toxicity benchmarks. That critter is like a midge, which is one of the species that we can use to test toxicity, and it's sensitive to fipronil. So the issue is, do we have, this illustrates the pesticide treadmill, that we products are registered, put into use, they're used a lot, we end up finding them in our creeks, we draw attention to that issue, and there is typically some form of response that may take certain products off the market or mitigate their use, but then something else emerges. And so this is the treadmill that we want to co-manage with our pesticide regulator friends. So that's the quick background. Now I'm just going to get into a summary of what's happened in the water quality regulatory side of things, and then we'll segue into the partnerships. So this just illustrates where there are potential, known or potential, or current or potential perithroid TMDLs in the state. And I think the colors don't show up very well, but you'll notice that Santa Barbara, Santa Maria area, it's like you just recently approved that TMDL, so you're familiar with this issue. And in fact, at that hearing, you asked for a workshop of this nature to get more informed on these issues. I highlight that the San Francisco Bay Area, 9 counties, has a perithroid TMDL, even though we did not explicitly establish a perithroid TMDL, and I'll explain that more in a couple of minutes, that when we did the diazinon TMDL, we made it proactive. We made the TMDL applicable to future listings of urban pesticides, or pesticides that cause toxicity in urban creeks. So by default, we didn't have to establish a TMDL for perithroids because we could use the one we already had. And I'll explain. And then there's actually some others that are in progress. But so you can see part of the setup here is, do we really want to take perithroid TMDLs on one by one, or is there a way we can manage them as a lot? And that's going to be the take-home message I'll get to. So taking a step. So now I'm going to explain is what we did, particularly in Region 2, but also has relevance for a statewide perspective. This is a slide that we've used for quite a while. Just explain the parallels between the pesticide regulators and the water quality regulators. EPA, part of the challenge that we think we face is that people use pesticides because, though they're approved by EPA, they must be okay, and they are to a certain extent. But our concern is, have they adequately accounted for water quality concerns above and beyond how reasonably well they account for, or probably very well, human health concerns. But the Office of Pesticide Programs and the Office of Water are essentially two separate entities within EPA operating under two separate laws. The Clean Water Act on the water side, the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act. That's regulation of pesticides. And there's a difference between those two, because one is more guilty until proven innocent, the other is more innocent until proven guilty. Water quality is more preventive than pesticide regulation, due to the need to use pesticides for human health and pest prevention basis. Similarly, though, so going into get off the philosophy of that, we have our counterparts, you in the regional water boards. We have the Department of Pesticide Regulation. We're both part of Cal EPA, and that dotted line was barely, is kind of more and more solid in terms of our active engagement. And at more the local level, of course, there are the municipalities, urban runoff management agencies, but there are also at the local level the county ag commissioners, which are essentially an arm of DPR. They are frontline. They have responsibility for implementing certain regs and enforcing them. And if I say more, I'll probably misrepresent what they actually are responsible to do. But I just want to show the parallels. And our challenge has been, how can we make the pesticide regulatory process work for us? Because rather than we using our discharge authority for water quality, we being the water boards or even EPA, because we can't regulate use of pesticides, and municipalities particularly cannot regulate use of pesticides. Only DPR can regulate use of pesticides in California. It makes sense to look for the pesticide regulators to help with this problem. In fact, prevent the water quality problem from happening. So, just a summary that when we took on the diazinon listings that I showed you, we had listings throughout the region. We did one TMDL that covered all urban creeks, not only the creeks that were listed on the 303D list. We said it's also applicable to any other creeks that may have diazinon impairment, not only due to creeks that have diazinon caused impairment, any pesticide caused impairment would be covered by that TMDL. So therefore it's timeless. It's available because the implementation scheme is applicable regardless of the pesticide, the active ingredient. So we established a diazinon target that was not that hard to meet because diazinon use went away, but we maintained this no pesticide caused toxicity target that is relevant to any. And then we spell out in the implementation plan, within our basin plan, how this TMDL or this target would be implemented through shared responsibilities. And I already mentioned that applies to future listings. So this next slide, I'm pretty sure it's a little busy.
But now it's green. It just has a delay. Where do you get the little fish bullets?
What?
I want fish bullets.
Oh, I can teach you how to make a bullet out of anything.
Really?
Yes.
All right, afterwards.
Yeah,
You and
yeah.
me.
You like
Thanks.
that? Yeah. I like them too. So this just illustrates, we actually, within the implementation plan of our basin plan for this, we lay out the roles and responsibilities of the various players, calling on US EPA, Office of Pesticide Programs, and California Department of Pesticide Regulation to do what they can to address our water quality concerns. I won't go into detail there. We do even recognize the role of the county ag commissioners. And right there in the middle, Structural Pest Control Board, they're a unique player, but they oversee the professional structural pest control operators. So there's a licensing thing, and so they have a role that they can play in terms of training of those players. And you see statewide IPM projects a key player because they do a lot of outreach, and the big aspect is promoting integrated pest management. The reality is pests, urbanization brings pests. So the pests are part of what we have to deal with and why there's pesticides, but there are alternatives to pesticides, there are pest prevention efforts. So the concept of integrated pest management is getting a lot more and more attention front and center as part of this. If you're going to use pesticides, do them as part of an integrated pest management effort. So use them wisely. And because a lot of the concern that we realize is these, especially insecticides by design, they're toxic, right? So if the more they use, the more they're used in a manner that can get run off into our creeks, the more problematic. So managed, focused use, particularly as part of IPM, is the way to go. And I don't have to tell you what our roles and responsibilities are. The municipalities, though, we are cautious that they have a role because they are the pathway for urban uses to get to our creeks and our other waters. They have constraints on what they can do in terms of controlling uses, but there are things that they can do. So we illustrate this, and it's actually what's in the plan, which is actually now in our permits in the Bay Area, that says, what are you required to do? Your role, municipalities, is to manage your costs and contributions. So manage your own uses through use of integrated pest management, et cetera, and then affect the uses of others through outreach and education, and then proactively working with the pesticide regulators, and then along with a degree of monitoring and evaluation on the success of these efforts. That little box there shows Gut Bugs, Get Answers, Our Water, Our World. That's a very effective outreach program. They get born in the Bay Area, which is now statewide, and it's a key part of it is point of sale outreach. So people go into a hardware store to buy pesticides. They get access to information on least toxic methods. It's one of the most successful outreach campaigns that I've ever observed. It's tough to affect people's habits, but when you confront them when they're buying a product, it's a good time, you get their attention. Oops, this is a busy slide, but I want to just, the three tops, it's just a restatement of what I just said. The permit requires them to engage in proactive regulation, as well as monitor and characterize creek conditions. And down the middle, promote less toxic pest control through the left, bottom left, their own uses and affect the uses by others. So I could say with certainty all municipalities in the Bay Area have established integrated pest management policies or ordinances, and they all have contracting specs to ensure that when they contract out use of pesticides, they're properly managed. Little story, back in the early days when we were talking with our municipalities about pesticide uses, I had one municipality say, well, we don't use pesticides. We contract out our use. Oh, our contractors use them, we don't. Fortunately, that's no longer the case. And then the various outreach efforts to the public at large and to businesses, et cetera. So the gist here is that we've basically, if you will, incorporated this into permit requirements. It's been in place for a number of years now, and I'll argue that, or suggest that it provides a statewide, a template for a statewide permit conditions for consistency. So I want to just end with just a quick overview of the status of our pesticide regulator efforts, and of course DPR is going to be able to tell you what they're up to. This is a quickie on about status of U.S. EPA actions in their addressing one particular pesticide, cypermethrin. It's a prethroid. They actually limited in the registration of that product to products can only be applied through spot treatment. That's just spot. And they also started using common sense label directions, particularly for prethroid pesticides. And a good example of it, don't apply it when it's raining. I mean, a lot of this is plain language, common sense stuff that otherwise is on those labels, which are your permit to use the pesticide, but they're drawing out some common sense things for the consumer to be aware of. And we're seeing some improvement in how they consider water quality concerns when they consider pesticide products. Mainly because we have been tenacious at commenting on every regulatory action that's come up since we engaged in this approach of proactively affecting pesticide regulations. So between our region, my region, and particularly our region and the Central Valley region, we are commenting on essentially every urban pesticide-related effort by EPA since, I think since 2010, we might have commented on 45 actions. But then that, on top of that, then we have the municipalities, the urban runoff management agencies, and the PUTWs are also commenting. So combination of all our efforts is getting close to 200 comment letters that's getting EPA's attention. So we have gotten their attention. They're well aware of us, and they're well aware of our concerns, and slowly but surely we're making some progress. This last bullet has to do with the differences between the Office of Pesticide Management and water quality. They don't use the same tests. So the pesticide side of things allows use tests that arguably are less sensitive than on the water quality side of things. Ergo, it gets screened to be okay, but then when that's put into use and we use our tests, we find they're not okay. So there's been a commitment on EPA's part to harmonize their methods. I can tell you this started during the Clinton administration.
Yeah, I was having a harmonization flashback.
So you might even remember this.
I had to harmonize a lot of air rules, particularly.
So, yeah, but DPR, the reason we're here is to
There wasn't a lot of harmony and harmonization.
So, yeah. So I'm going to just finish. So main reason we're here is to recognize the amount of effort that we've realized from DPR. So that just highlights some of the main things that they took on prethroids, multiple products, multiple prethroids through a reevaluation effort, which is a pretty intensive effort overall, working with what they call the registrants. But as an outgrowth of that, and most importantly, were these 2012 surface water protection regs that really restrict how certain pesticides can be used. Pesticides for outdoor structural uses, no longer allowed to do the banned application, spot or like line treatment and some other conditions. And there's a projection, and I don't know if I'm going to say this right, but I think upwards of 80% reduction in the use, in the amount of certain prethroids should be realized through this effort. So we have our fingers crossed that as an outgrowth of those regs, we're going to see substantial improvements in our waters. But that's the key. We have a base of action. We're going to be monitoring, and then if needed, DPR will adapt as appropriate. So they are a key part of this monitoring effort through their own efforts. And I can't say enough about how much quality dialogue we have with DPR at the management level and as well as the staff level, where we are truly brothers and sisters within Cal EPA. I really like you and the public to know that we are working closely together, and that's a big reason why we're sitting here at the table together.
That is great.
And of course, the municipalities are, I want to say, they're sitting here too, because they're part of our collaborative creating things. So this is the future. I would recommend that the best approach is to do this consistently statewide to address urban pesticides. I would recommend, it's mostly a matter of when do we have the resources and time to do this, but we could do a statewide water quality control plan for pesticides modeled after what we've done in the Bay Area that would address existing listings, and it would be applicable to the future. So one fell swoop, we address this. And we do have our TMDL roundtable, has been with a work group headed by Danny McClure, who's in the audience, has been exploring the possibility of doing this, and so we got a good foundation. Like I said, it's just a matter of time and when we can do this. We are in the process now of updating in dialogue with DPR on the 1997 management agency agreement. I'm not going to say more about that because I think both DPR and Rich will call attention to that. And this third bullet is what I'd also would promote, that we could take the model and improve upon the model from the Bay Area and come up with municipal stormwater permit requirements that are consistent statewide. Pesticides issues are the same throughout the state. They're not unique to any particular watershed. Although I think some of the bugs are bigger down south. They have fire ants. We don't have fire ants up here, for example. And then and the key is that we have a coordinated statewide monitoring effort that is evolving. We have a good relationship, coordination with DPR, which you'll hear about. And it's a different color of municipalities because municipalities are required and are part of the effort, but we can do a lot better at bringing them into the coordinated effort. In fact, even affect permit requirements rather than having everybody monitor for pesticides everywhere at all times. We can all be part of a strategic network throughout the state that's focused. We don't have to require municipalities to see if there's pesticides in their creeks or particular ones. We pretty much can say they're there because we want to focus on representative creeks that will allow us to track, hopefully, the prevention of problems, or if they do occur, track the solution of those problems. So that's where I stop. And then, and if you want to keep moving, given the time, I'm going to just introduce Brian Leahy, who you all know is Executive Director of the Department of Pesticide Regulation.
Okay, yeah, I'm not sure about the executive part. So,
Oh, you are? You're not? I've misstated your title?
well, you added an extra word.
Oh, well.
Anyways,
correct.
good afternoon. What I'd like to do is tell you a little bit about who we are, DPR, what we're doing on surface water protection, where we're going forward, and then I have a couple of asks. As you may know, I was one of the first organic farmers long before it was popular or anyone knew what you're talking about. But the reason why was the man that taught me how to farm came back from the Second World War when they were introducing a lot of the chemistry for the first time, and he noticed the environmental effects. As he said, the fish were dying, the birds were flopping, the frogs were dying, and didn't want any part of that. My last job with the state before I came to DPR included the oversight of the state watershed program. So, this is nothing new. It's very good. And some of you know that when I go home, water is often on my wife's mind. So anyways, DPR, we are a science-based organization. Our mission is really to protect human health and the environment as legal pesticides are used. And then the third leg of that is to foster reduced use, IPM, something along those lines. We have a working relationship with county ag commissioners. We pay for the work of about 300 biologists in the field to do pesticide enforcement and education. That's more than USEPA has in the nation. We are tied to US EPA. They are sort of the top dog, and then we take what they give us, and then we make it California specific. I think it's interesting. Our funding source is what we call a mill assessment. So every time pesticides in California are sold for the first point of sale, 2.1 cent of every dollar goes to run our program and the county ag commissioners programs and whatnot. And over half of that comes from the non-agricultural side. You know, and if you think of antimicrobials, you know, there's a lot of things that are defined as pesticides. If it wants to kill something, it's pesticide. So, so pesticides is what we do. So what we've been doing.
Can I just go back to that?
Yep.
If over half of it comes from urban pesticides, I know we know the impact is greater in terms of urban pesticides, but that means that actually the volume of urban pesticide purchasing is greater than ag.
That's right.
purchasing. Wow.
And yet, if you ask Californians about pesticides, they think it's only an agricultural issue.
Yeah.
But most of our, you know, we have very extensive data. We really try to follow up on every incident where pesticides created a human illness. Most of it, more than half of it is coming from the non-ag side. A lot of it, 40% of it is antimicrobials, so as people are cleaning. You know, what we see is a lot of people that use a lot of chemistry on the urban side, but they're not trained the way the agricultural side is.
Yeah.
So that is actually, you know, where we're going to get at. We have really stepped up our urban enforcement and urban use of pesticides, really looking at it hard. And industry is aware of that. They've actually come to us with a plan of how they're going to increase efficiency of use, as well as keeping it on target, which is really the
Can you
game.
define the industry? Because my guess is, I'm always thinking about people listening on the webcast.
Mm-hmm.
They don't even know what that industry is. So can you bring it to?
In our case, it's folks that make the antimicrobials. So think of bleach. So when you go in a hospital or the dentist's office, you want to ensure that that office has been sterilized. So there's using for that. A lot of public health is really dependent on pesticides. You know, if you get in a bus, you know, the reason why we don't have critters crawling around and whatnot is because, you know, that bus has been cleaned, sterilized. Think about the movement of water. You know, there's a lot of chemistry that goes in ensuring that we're not dying off of cholera and things like that. So you know, pesticide, and I'll get to this a little later, but for better or worse, pesticides are one of the key foundations of modern society. You know, it is why we're not dying off of cholera and why we have abundant food supply and why we can do resource management, you know, and not be overwhelmed by invasives and all that good stuff. So, so that's what we're talking about.
Do you have,
So some of the things that we've done on this issue.
Do you have information about the difference between retail or residential use versus commercial applicators?
We do. We are a data-rich organization. Now, Tom is correct. When we were really created, and you know, over the years, the focus has been agriculture, and so we know every time an agricultural chemical is used, we know where, when, why, who, all that good stuff. On the urban side, it's not as robust, you know, and you know, we just got some new law to look at schools. You know, there's, I don't know how many, 8 million kids running around schools and all that, you know, and how they use pesticides there matters. So we, you know, we're looking at that. But we are very data rich. Data is what helps us to go and move forward. You know, if we see we have a problem, we'll put it into, Tom called registration, or excuse me, reevaluation. Reevaluation is a slow process, but we put something in reevaluation. It gives us legal right to demand studies and get information. So,
but getting back to my question, so 50% ag, 50% urban. Of the 50% urban, do you have information, or could you estimate on? And I don't know how to describe, how to frame my question, but I'm thinking of the pest control applicator versus residential or even in a commercial setting that's not necessarily by, a company that comes in and applies?
You want me to
Yeah,
take
go
a
ahead.
stab at that? David Duncan, Department of Pesticide Regulation. So commercial applicators, whether they're structural, maintenance gardeners, they're licensed by us, they're required to report their use. They do that in a monthly summary form. It's not specific to each application, but it's specific to the active ingredient. So they are, and the product, they're adding all of that up for the month and reporting it. Of course, what isn't reported is what residents are using. So that's now with ag, each application is identified and reported.
Right. So on the percentage then?
We-
It's,
I mean, we can give you some rough, pretty good estimates. As I noted, every time the pesticide is sold into the state, they have to pay a mill assessment. So we have a pretty good idea of, how much pesticides are sold. And then we know what's ag uses, and we have a good idea of, the licensed professional, the home use folks. And then you start looking at the big box stores and all that. There's a lot of pesticides sold through there. And you have to remember, pesticides includes, if you go into the store and buy a shirt that has antimicrobial claims or, that's a pesticide. And so, and that's an issue, I think, for you all because they're using heavy metals. And so, and as you wash, it comes through. So we kind of touch all of society, but we're going to run out of time.
One more
Oh.
thing I'll add about the sales. So we do have sales. It's a little confusing with some products because they may be what's called dual use. So you'll have some that are registered for ag uses as well as urban uses or household uses. So it gets a little confusing when we're looking at the sales data. But in terms of residential products, it's often the easiest to look at sales data. And they do compare pretty accurately with use, as we've seen over the years.
Yeah.
Just specifically to your question, and I'm referring really just to, in this case, pyrethroids, for example, but it's pretty similar with what was happening with diazinon and chlorpyrifos before. If you take how much, we were able to estimate how much was in urban areas was accountable to reported uses versus unreported uses by sort of figuring out how much was sold in the state and subtracting out agricultural uses and then reported urban uses. And it really, it's much more, it's more like around 3/4 or at least 2/3 of it, of what is applied with the pyrethroids was attributable to professional structural applications. So the over-the-counter sales, which is a rough number because we're extrapolating from sales numbers, it's a much larger fraction was attributable to licensed applicators.
That's helpful, thanks. And I know we're going to run out of time, but just to put it in context, the reason for the question, I'd be curious if that covers 2/3 of the area or less than 2/3 or more, because my sense is that the homeowner, you spray a can of Raid and, well, maybe if you spray it a little bit more, now it'll really do the job, as opposed to someone in the commercial setting where they have standards as to what they can apply. And that's just my sense, but I don't have a way to tell.
Yeah.
So maybe in further discussion, we can kind of tease this out.
So like if some is good, more is better,
Yeah,
if you're not a professional.
right.
Well, what we do know is that licensed, trained professionals have probably been the backbone of the improvements we've made over the years. So it's kind of a no-brainer. And all right, so some of the things we've done, even since I've gotten here, is one of the first things I did was I asked for 5 new scientists, 5 new PYs to look at environmental phytopesticides. We have put a lot of money into our lab to really start to do the kind of monitoring for surface water. And we've really improved our modeling. We're really starting to understand, how this chemistry breaks down. And how different things will really, determine how much runoff is going to be. We've, as I said, in our strategic plan and just our, where we were starting to put resources, we're really stepping up our urban side of the, our enforcement and efforts. David's going to talk about two of the chemicals that, we've dealt with, the pyrethroids and then fipronil. He'll give you examples of what we've done, where we're going. I have to tell you, we're the only state that I know where a regulatory agency can come in and put in regulations and get an award. But we have, we're very proud of that. We kind of have to keep in mind that these chemicals that David's going to talk about, they're about ants for the most part, bugs and
That was going
ants.
to be one of my questions.
Well, and from what I can figure out, California sits on an anthill. And people don't like ants. They don't like them in their homes. They don't want them in the retail,
Well, they're good as
want them in
cartoons.
restaurants. They got hang-ups on bugs and ants and things like that. So that's why they're using this stuff. That's why they're calling in professionals. That's sort of that's the social benefit, apparently, of these particular pesticide uses, is to deal with their things on ants. So that's something that's a bigger issue. And then going forward, what we're going to really work on is this relationship. We've really spent a lot of time on it. It's something, that we see is really essential, and so there's a huge commitment for that. We're really working with industry. We got their attention. They actually have come to us with some ideas on how they can really start to get to the folks that use a lot of chemistry but aren't trained and licensed, or they're not trained the way that the agricultural side is. What we're seeing is that there's some folks, and the landscape folks, the people that do janitors and the custodials, maids, restaurant folks that are using chlorine. So there's a handful of folks, or it's actually several 100,000 people using a lot of chemistry, but not having the training that the licensed trained professionals really should have. So we're going to really work on that. And then the urban, the consumers, the day-to-day consumers, that's going to be a good challenge. And we really do, our main tools is registration. And then, of course, once something's registered, it's, what happens is US EPA registers it, and then it comes into California, and we look at it again. I think we're the only state that really does that on any kind of robust level for California's specific needs and protections that are required. And then we have mitigations, so we say, okay, we know people are going to use something, we're going to limit how they can use it. There's all kinds of ways to do mitigations. I mean, on your automobile, the seat belt was a mitigation. In other words, there's going to be harm, and we're going to try to protect you from the harm. And then we're really pushing IPM, the figuring out how do we do reduced use, how do we get away from the need to use that chemistry. So when we did that landscaping conference, part of that, I know it was water, but it was also, people don't need to use chemistry if they don't have a lawn that's under stress all the time because it's in a Mediterranean climate and it wants to be in England. So that IPM is an important thing. And then kind of our asks, I think one is we would really ask you to continue to be involved in registration. Prevention's the best. If you see chemistry that you think is going to be a concern, there's a very robust open comment period, and you just give us the science, give us the reasons, and that helps us to look at it again. And then, we still may register it, but we may really reduce as Tom said, the band that it can be used. We can really start to put in protective measures in place up front. It's much better to do it up front than to have to go through the whole reevaluation and figure it all out later. I think you could really help us with reaching out to the landscape gardeners and folks like that. They are by law, they're supposed to be licensed, but it's a challenging community to reach. The licensing is going to cost them the first time maybe $300 to $600, which for them is a lot of money. So if we could figure out ways to work together to do some good licensing, things like that. We've had success on some of these education of the consumers and things like that, but we really need to work together, and I would include all the water districts and, you know, all the folks like that to really start to look at why people use pesticides, where we can get away from them because they're creating the problem. And a lot of this is, you know, in our landscaping, in how we design houses, how we, you know, the man-made landscape can either require, you know, create the problem or it can address the problem. And so there's big issues there. I think you're going to have to really understand us. You know, we're trying to understand you all, and you need to understand us. We have a different culture, but we also have different statutes. You know, we really are science-based, which science takes time, no matter how you get around from it. And I mean, pesticides are probably the most regulated item in commerce for a good reason. You know, we use them because we want to kill something or set something back. I mean, that's what they're all about. They're killing machines. But we acknowledge that they can be used because there's great social benefit. You know, and it really goes, I mean, it goes from, you know, making sure that people don't spread Ebola to I want a boat and sits there in the harbor all day and, you know, I don't want to move it that often, so I want to put some copper paint on it. So there's different social benefits in there. But that's what. So, so the society has said, all right, I guess we're going to live with pesticides, but we want some real protections in place. We run a really good regulatory agency, you know, and if allowed to do our job, we'll make continuous slow improvement. And I have seen remarkable improvements over the 35 years since I've been, you know, first started in this. So that's kind of, you know, this is a commitment to work with you all. David's going to give you a little more detailed science-based words, so stuff like that. And then if there's any more questions, we can either do it now or at coffee.
That's great. Just to reinforce something that Dr. Mumley brought up, you know, when we're talking about the state board's involvement, we're always on the lookout. As this month, we're looking at another pesticide, the chlorine in drinking water, and how it can end up in surface waters later this month, the discharge permit. So that's a statewide issue, and really, I think it's what's emerged through that type of process is yes, it makes sense to have a statewide framework, and you know, and Tom's presentation says, hey, we think it makes sense to have a statewide framework, and I just would like you to maybe echo that if it's your opinion that the issues of urban pesticide application, the type of chemistry used in all different parts of our hydrologic variety, are consistent and warrant a statewide consistent approach throughout our regional boards. Do you believe that to be the case?
Yep, very, very much so. But we need, people don't think, I mean, I've seen very deeply committed environmentalists go nuts when they have an ant in their house and they call up their guys. And people are hiring landscapers who are using God knows what, because they don't know what. Those people should be licensed, you know, they should, and the homeowners need to be asking for that. So we really need to address urban pesticide use. As we all know, it's cheaper to recycle water. You know, I love that toilet to tap concept versus import it from somewhere else and move it and all that good stuff, you know. And so we're changing, and the culture's changing. As you all know, in the 30s, we had some terrible flooding down in Orange County, and that part of the state just decided to move water off as quickly as possible to the ocean. They paved their rivers. And so now they're saying, whoa, maybe we should do recharge, use our own water again, get back to that. Well, if we're going to get back to that, we want that water to not contain certain things that it's going to cost us a lot of money to get rid of. So we really want to work with you all, and it would help us a lot to achieve our mission.
So great. And I appreciate you emphasizing that point, and clearly appreciate the incredible cultural shift and partnership that DPR presents to the water boards, and just want to support that at every turn. You know, you mentioned landscape, and so I'd like to just take the opportunity to plug, you know, yeah, it doesn't mitigate the effects of overuse of pesticides or misuse, but the fact that we're pursuing, you know, low impact development initiatives with our public works and finding ways to slow water down, while it doesn't deal with the source control issues that you're taking on, don't you think that's also complementary, you know, our initiatives to remove solids that may have pyrethroids attached to them in certain best management practice or low impact development principles.
Yeah, I think, we live in a Mediterranean climate for the most part. Let's start to really behave like we do. We want to capture water. We don't have to use landscaping. We don't have to do landscaping that requires that we move water or overdraft simply to have something, when the opposite could be we could actually help capture the water that's falling and eliminate the need for a lot of chemistry. But it has to be, we have to, there's a lot of urban myths. Science is good. We have to really figure out, if we do something, does it really have a net positive? But we're moving there.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. It's complicated, but I see benefits to even the drinking water issue that I mentioned. If we slow water down, that gives time for chloramine to dissipate, and you don't have the toxic effects in the waterways. And it comes back to how we design water moving over the urban landscape too, as well as the chemistry that we throw at it. Thanks. Thanks for those remarks. As usual, Director Leahy's hits it nail on the head. Thank you.
Okay, if we could get the PowerPoint back up. Yeah, I think, well, no, mine would be under Duncan. Yeah, yeah. Just a comment, too, about the industry. I think there was a question that came up about that. Typically, when we refer to the industry, it's the chemical industry, so the registrants, the grower industry, we won't be talking about today, and then the applicators. So it's really the two, the registrants and the applicators. Okay.
Cool.
Let's see. Yeah, I'm pushing the right arrow and nothing is happening. Shall I try the left arrow? Oh, okay, sure. Ah, there we go. Now I'll probably overshoot. Okay, well, what I want to do is walk through some of the things that Tom has mentioned in a little bit more detail. DPR's responsive actions, typically those are regulations, so I'll mention an example of that. Also, the issue raised about reevaluation, that is a rather significant responsive action with registrants. Our long-term urban monitoring locations, which really give us a finger on the pulse of significant problems that we're seeing. So those are responsive in a way because we react to what we found in monitoring. Preventive are registration evaluations, which I guess I'll characterize a little bit as an intervention where we receive data packets and review them, model the data, and try to determine if there's a potential issue. We also are setting monitoring priorities, and what I mean by that is we're constantly reviewing our monitoring priorities every 6 months for evaluating possible patterns of new active ingredients that are coming up, and we're seeing a pattern of increased detection and maybe increased use as well. And then our communication with the water boards. Oh, wrong way. No, is the battery getting low? Oh, there we go.
We
Okay.
have that monitor as sort of a hazing ritual for people.
Yeah, it's a, yeah, right. Yeah, a little comic relief there. Okay. So talking about the pyrethroid specifically, there were 600 products containing at least one of 20 different active ingredients that were thrown into the reevaluation process. And it's really a data gathering system for us to kind of compel the registrants to work with us on filling data gaps and to conduct research. The decision to put pyrethroids in was based on frequency of detection and exceedances of water quality standards, and it turned out to be in both ag and urban. But urban did far outshine ag in terms of its frequency of detection and the levels we were finding. And that may have something to do with the concentration of the urban scenario. So in 2008, then, we started our statewide urban monitoring sites, and they're long-term monitoring sites in urban waterways. And we worked with the registrants to identify what ought to be the problems, restrictions, and the registrants developed kind of a simulated a neighborhood street with driveways, sidewalks, walkways, landscape, garage doors, walls, and simulated rainfall. So that, and this was all funded by the Pyrethroid Working Group, which is identified here. A consortium of pyrethroid registrants. So then they looked at the fate and transport of these chemicals in that simulated urban environment. Now, really what ended up happening too was that we got into a lot of outreach potential here, and the applicators and the Pyrethroid Working Group came together to create instructional videos on the regulations. And they were good. It's how to comply with the regulations. But then recently we looked at them and there was a missing component. And that component was, why are the regulations implemented? So they went back, and I just looked at a draft of that, and it complements the reason for implementing the regulations very well, protecting surface water, and provides the applicators with that understanding. So specifically, the regulations, not all of them, but just to touch on some, to keep a distance of at least 25 feet from an aquatic habitat, to reduce the amount that's used to spot crack and crevice, and a 1-inch band now instead of a 12-inch band or perhaps larger, going around the base of a foundation. And remember that pyrethroids are used not just around the structure, but actually in the landscape too. So there are many uses. And then, as Tom was mentioning, keep it away from water, and don't apply during the rain. A couple of others, keep it out of French drains that you'll see on the left, as well as plumbed drainage systems in the landscape itself. And then 2 feet away, if it's a broadcast treatment, 2 feet away from impervious surfaces. And if, for instance, pyrethroid containing granules that have fertilizer in them or on the surface, there's a requirement to sweep those back into the landscape. Keep them off the sidewalk. Well, we are moving on to other things, certainly, but we're not ignoring the regulations. We're trying to look back as well. So we want to determine, are these limitations for use effective? We have research showing that they can still remain efficacious in terms of controlling pests, but are we making a difference is the question. And so we're going out, the state is going out and training county staff in the regulations. We're training our regional offices and the county staff in how to comply. And we're involved in a contract right now where we have pest control businesses as well as residents that we're training and working with. Residents, really the message is certainly follow the labels, because the labels now have been changed. DPR decided to go with regulations because they were more expedient than waiting for EPA and the registrants to come together. It turns out that DPR doesn't have authority over labels. But we do have authority over regulations, certainly, and enforcing those. So we work closely with our county inspectors. We've been training them. There may even be I think there were over 100 inspections in Orange County alone for urban uses such as these. So it's no small thing, I think, in terms of making sure that our inspectors are trained. The project that we're working on now in one of our watersheds that we're monitoring regularly is to focus that outreach on the residents and the pest control businesses so that we can get the best possible scenario, hopefully, to determine the effectiveness of the regulations, but at the same time recognizing that pyrethroids have an affinity to sediment. And so it may take a little bit of time to recognize differences there.
They have
But,
an affinity to what?
pardon me?
An affinity to what?
For sediment?
Oh, sediment.
So they're, hygroscopic, I
Oh,
think is
yeah.
the term, and so they stick to sediment. So we may not, and there's a phase between the water and the sediment that can occur. So we still look for them in the water column, but we're also looking for them in the sediment, and because of that, there may be an extended period of time to see improvement. So where are these locations? And I'll draw your attention to the blue outlined areas. Those are urban locations, and up north is Folsom and Roseville. Down in Southern California, we have 2 in Orange County, separate watersheds. These are primarily residential in character. The green areas are ag monitoring sites. So we've been monitoring these blue areas since about 2008, when these sites were established. And we monitor them 4 times a year, twice during the rainy season and twice during the dry season. And when we're monitoring during a storm, like last Friday, for instance, staff are out there and sampling half an hour after the rainfall comes down to capture the worst case scenario. We're also adding 3 additional locations. We did this last year. Sites in San Diego, in Los Angeles, and in the Bay Area, and we're looking at commercial as well as residential, kind of a mixed watershed, so that we're not just capturing the neighborhoods, but we're also capturing the commercial environments where these pesticides are used as well. Okay. Drilling down just a little bit closer, these are the 2 in Northern California on the top and the 2 in Southern California on the bottom. They do fall out into what we call water quality ponds. So, and those can be attenuating factors when it comes to off-site movement of some pesticides and other pollutants. But we're trying to capture the worst case as well, so we are actually monitoring what's coming out of the storm drain itself. So what are we seeing? These on the y-axis is the detection frequency, and we're looking at a snapshot in 2013. Northern California and Southern California. I think one of Tom's slides had bifenthrin listed up there. Well, you'll see it prominently as standing first in line. In terms of detection frequency, we don't see level of toxicity here or exceedance of water quality standards, but this is one of the important things that we pay attention to. A couple of herbicides, 2,4-D and triclopyr, the levels are lower, even though frequency of detection is high. And then you'll notice fipronil, the next insecticide. So bifenthrin insecticide, fipronil insecticide, and then sulfone and disulfonil. Those are degradates of fipronil. And we're finding those as well. So we're not just looking for the parent, we're looking for breakdown products as well. And it kind of looks pretty clear that Southern California kind of gets the prize for detection frequency, in this case, of most pesticides.
Are the anything that ends in thrin, the pyrethroids generally, like bifenthrin, permethrin?
Yes, permethrin, cyfluthrin, deltamethrin, lambda salhalothrin.
Yeah, so those are all pyrethroid.
Yes, those are all
synthesized.
pyrethroids. And most of them are ones that were included in the reevaluation process and are identified in our regulations. So we are tracking those as well. On to fipronil, just to drill down a little bit more into this. Again, you'll see the sulfone and disulfonil there. There are other breakdown products. Interestingly, sulfone and disulfonil have similar toxicities to the parent material. So what you're seeing here is a delayed reaction in the process of breakdown that in some cases can maintain a certain level of toxicity. Southern California may have more of an issue with ants. It would seem so. Now, fipronil is not used in the landscape. Okay, it's used on the hard surfaces. So in terms of its use outside as an insecticide, it's a much narrower kind of use than the pyrethroids. And about 80% of the time we're seeing it when we collect samples in Southern California, and half the time in Northern California.
So it's being detected, but is it at action levels or?
Benchmarks, they're exceeding the benchmarks as well. We use US EPA chronic, the lowest benchmark, and it's exceeding,
So
yes.
it's seen in effects levels in receiving waters
Well, it's...
or on the
benchmarks-
landscape?
The benchmarks are just below an effect level, but we're seeing levels that exceed that, so there would be chronic effects potentially. So where we are right now with fipronil, about 3 months ago, we had a presentation to the primary registrant, showed them use data, our monitoring data, and they came back in last month, made a presentation to us, submitted data. We're in the process of evaluating that, and we're going to be responding to that in writing with the registrant. Particularly frequency of detections and the exceedances that are a concern. So fipronil isn't in reevaluation at this point. We'd like to proceed in collaboration with the registrant to address the levels that we're seeing. And that's kind of where we are with
So it just, to make it clear, so that does make sense because it can be so much faster. And so is that an issue of the potentially, just so I understand it, the registrant doing something to deal with over-application through education or better labeling, or no? What is it?
The registrant has suggested that there are misuse, there's the potential of misuse, that there may be more frequent applications than are allowed by the label, which is only twice per year, interestingly. And fipronil is a very effective product, so I think the applicators are very interested in preserving it in any way possible, which is likely going to reduce use in some way, narrowing its use. But again, it's not in the landscape. It's only around the structure. So, and it can be, I think, a spot crack and crevice as well. And it's supposed to be, according to the label, kept away from drains. So there are already some mitigation measures. In addition to that, it's for professional use only.
Oh.
So this is
It's not something the homeowner can get at Home
Exactly.
Depot.
It is not. Now, apparently you can buy this online, but it's a relatively expensive product, and kind of my gut feeling is that the resident isn't going to go out of their way to buy a more expensive product when they can go down to the home and garden store and buy something that may be just as effective. A pyrethroid, for instance. Okay. So that's where we are. We will be responding within the next month or two and proceeding accordingly with the registrant.
Interesting.
Just to
You
talk...
know, I'm sorry, I'm getting, I was thinking science-y, excuse me. But you talked about that demonstration, is that the UC Irvine one, or am I mixing that up with something?
No,
Okay,
this-
never mind.
yeah.
So you have a neighborhood, and then you're
Uh-huh.
doing experiments and seeing fate and transport. So are these type of low-impact development, swales and things like that, have any preliminary information about fipronil fate, or is it just,
Well-
these degradation products are around, and so having landscape treatments may not solve the issue. You're looking into it.
We are doing our own monitoring in some of these water quality ponds, looking for the degradates. It does turn out, you're right, the swales or the water quality ponds do reduce the level. Fipronil tends to be less drawn to the sediment, though, so it's more in the water column. So it may move through the system a little more quickly, don't know. There is some research being done right now down in Riverside with pest control businesses. It's not yet published, but we're funding this to really identify the most significant source in the landscape. And preliminarily, it appears that the front of the house, particularly the driveway, and that area that sticks out and is prone to drainage in the front of the house may be the most significant runoff potential for fipronil, as well as other pesticides.
I just find that kind of discussion interesting. Sorry to keep this thing
Yeah.
going, but you know,
Yeah.
it's just how, and you know, Director Lay pointed out, how do we design our landscapes and how this is an indicator of possible problems. So,
Right, because
and-
most properties are designed to drain out to the gutter as quickly as possible and get the water away from the structure.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And then,
Yeah.
yeah.
And as it turns out with pyrethroids, we're finding that what's put on the permeable surfaces isn't really responsible for what we're seeing in the storm drain. It's what's on the impermeable surface. So, okay, to step into the more preventive area, this is kind of what we're doing. I mentioned earlier about our monitoring prioritization. As a first cut, we look at use and toxicity. We take that rough cut, then we look at monitoring data from all sources, use patterns, application methods, what's happening, and then the chemical properties that may contribute to persistence and mobility, just things moving off. And we're doing this every 6 months, so we're trying to find those emerging patterns. This is just an example of a few counties and the prioritization that we did for them. Some Bay Area counties, we've got Sacramento and Placer, the foothills by Fenthrin, once again, top of the list, and you'll see some other pyrethroids as well. Some other common pesticides, certainly copper, and some herbicides as well. One of the most significant, though, is our evaluation process in close communication with our registration branch, where they have criteria for our surface water program. And when they're reviewing data packets for registration, and those criteria are triggered, they send them to us for evaluation. We look at the chemistry, we look at the use scenarios, the use patterns, if it's, especially in an urban scenario, if it's going on solid surfaces, impermeable surfaces, and we model. We use the basis of US EPA's PRISM models for both commercial and residential modeling, but we have modified those for California. So EPA around a residence has almost all impermeable surface except for a little walkway and a tiny sidewalk. So we add significantly to that. And for commercial as well. In commercial, it seems like it's almost half permeable, and that's just not the case in California. So we've increased that, dialed that up, and we're seeing some differences. So and we've even improved some of the algorithms so that we can estimate loading based on the size of a band that's modeled around a structure. Anyway, we can...
Active ingredients, right?
Yes,
AI.
exactly. Sorry. Active ingredient as opposed to a degradate. So we
That's
can...
that DPR acronym system.
Yeah, we
gotta get used to
have
that.
the alphabet soup as well. Yeah.
We have our own. We'll have a meeting about that. Thanks.
Okay. We look at use pattern changes, and in fact, we can look at a new active ingredient in a new product and think that it's okay from a modeling standpoint, but we can flag it for future changes, because occasionally registrants will then want to introduce additional use patterns and registrations to a new product or an existing product. All of a sudden now there's hard surface uses, impermeable surface uses that weren't there before. We need to get that back and model it, and so that opportunity is given to us by looking at those amendments. The kinds of recommendations we make back to the registration branch are to proceed with registration, conditionally register, and this is our hook to get analytical methods from registrants. So we don't want to wait until something has been registered. We want to add it to our screen if we think that it's going to be out there in the environment. So we require that to be provided to us, and that's a commercially viable analytical method before it gets registered, okay, completely. And then we can also make recommendations to not register, which we've done on occasion. So in summary, we have updates to our modeling that is rapidly improving. Evaluations are a real key to our preventive process. Analytical methods are really necessary for us to get a handle on what's going on out there quickly. Our long-term monitoring gives us an idea of how things are changing